Welcome to Huntin' Stories, brought to you by Late to the Game Outdoors. Everyone loves a good story, and hunters have some of the best. Our whole mission is to collect and share great stories from hunters just like you, to entertain and keep you motivated all year long. So, pull up a seat around the campfire, because here we go. All right, welcome to Huntin' Stories. I'm your host, Eric. This is episode 2 and the first official story, since episode 1 was like the get to know your podcast episode, which is apparently a thing. Anyway, today, telling the story of my 2017 Arizona archery bull elk hunt, which is one of my favorite stories to tell. There was a whole lot of firsts wrapped up in that story. So it was my first kill with a bow ever. It was my first elk, actually. The first hunting film I ever made. It was just a whole lot came together all at once in that hunt, and it was amazing. So, without further ado, here we go. I was hunting northern Arizona, because that's where elk are, and it was somehow, it's a freak thing. Like, for the unit I always put in as my top choice in Arizona, which is a draw system for elk, it's usually like 3 to 5-ish years between drawing tags. Somehow I had drawn a tag in 2016 and then drew that same tag in 2017. I don't know what happened, but I was grateful. 2016, I was hunting the same spot, had a couple close calls, drew on a couple of elk, but it never came together. There was never a good shooting lane. It was so close, but just didn't happen. So 2017, I was super pumped to go back into the same area. And at the same time, I had all this other pressure in my head that I had just launched Late to the Game. I was out there with cameras for the first time, and I was thinking, like, man, how am I going to figure this out? But I was out there hunting with my father-in-law and my brother-in-law in this section of woods that we know really well and that we love. And so the way we would typically hunt, that trio of us, is we would walk out in the dark. My father-in-law likes to hunt from a tree stand, so we would kind of walk out and drop him off at his stand, and then my brother-in-law and I would kind of go out as a duo, and we would just stay out all day long. So we would chase him in the morning and do some calling, and then by the late morning, early afternoon, we would just kind of sit down and take a little nap and rest up. And then again, late afternoon, we would get up and sort of loop our way back to where the truck was while trying to catch up with some elk. So first day, nothing much happened. Didn't see much, didn't hear much. We saw a few, we got into them, but they weren't really calling. They didn't really care about our calls. Day 2, they started firing up, like a lot more bugles in that morning. A couple close calls, but could never really seal it or get the wind right. By day 3, these huge winds were starting to pick up. Like, not just kind of blustery or gusts of wind, like just sustained 10 to 15 mile an hour winds with gusts above that, which made it a lot harder to call, and made my father-in-law not want to sit in a tree all day, just sitting there waving around, getting seasick. So he took a couple days off to kind of hang back at the cabin and just rest, and my brother-in-law and I went out chasing elk every day. And as we're trying to call and get them involved, we were relying mostly on cow calls. Well, I should clarify. He was relying mostly on cow calls because he told me early on, after he heard the cow call sounds I was making, that I should get better or shut up. So I couldn't get better immediately and just kind of left the calling to him. Now it's this area is sort of like, it's not really glassable. There's not really big mountains or drainages. It's just kind of like flat, sort of rolling hills and like pockets of thick timber scattered by like more open timber. Like, it's kind of just broken up country. And so we could call and we could get them interested, but we got the same thing every time, where like they'd be 80 to 100 yards out. They would look right at us because they heard the cow calls, didn't see a cow, and so hung up. Like, I'm sure every elk hunter who's done any amount of elk hunting has seen this scenario play out. Well, once they can see where a sound's coming from, if they don't see what they should be seeing, they get suspicious and they move on. So we dealt with that for the first 3 days at least. Finally, by like the end of day 3, we were noticing like there was this area kind of over by where my father-in-law's tree stand was where he kept seeing elk moving through the same corridor behind him, way out of range. They weren't coming into him, but he could see them moving every day. So we kind of just went that direction and decided to sort of like hunker down and sit quietly, more ambush style. And that morning, sure enough, a bunch of elk came moving by, and they went by me at about 100 yards, but they were heading straight for this other side of this like clear meadow where my brother-in-law was sitting back in the timber a little ways. And so I watched this big, beautiful bull go walking back into there. And I thought at any second, like, I'm just going to hear chaos and elk moving because it's walking right towards him. He's going to get a shot. Turns out what had happened was sure enough, this bull came in with a few of his cows, and he went behind this little spindly pine tree. My brother-in-law came to full draw, and the elk did that thing elk do so well where he like brought his head onto the other side of the tree and stopped right there. So my brother-in-law sitting there at full draw, just waiting for this elk to take its last step. Well, that has poetic meaning, I suppose. Waiting for that one more step so that he could get a shot at the vitals. And one of the cows was wise to him, was alert that something was not right, something was going on. And so she kind of blew out a little bit and got everyone on edge. That bull never took another step forward, but just kind of looked around for a minute and then decided to tear off in the other direction because something wasn't feeling right. So he was within one step of getting a shot on this awesome bull who I think was under 50 yards from him. And so it was exciting. It was wonderful, but, disappointing. But we decided after that, like, man, yeah, there are elk moving all around in this spot. So we spent the late morning building this kind of 90-degree brush blind back in that area. And decided that, okay, we'll hunt the rest of the afternoon and evening the way we normally do, but the next morning, day 5, we're going to come back to this blind. And so sure enough, nothing happened the rest of that day. We went, hiked out early, went back to that blind, and it was like a 90-degree wedge kind of configuration, so we were basically just sitting there watching in our two different directions, and the agreement was kind of like, okay, if a bull comes on Zach's side, it's his, if it comes on my side, it's mine, and sitting there for a little while in the morning, with just, again, like the wind was just not letting up, but fortunately blowing kind of in our faces, which the paths we were watching that the elk should be traveling, they were all going to be upwind of us. So perfect. Couple hours into the morning, suddenly, we'd seen some cows and stuff coming by, but no bulls yet. And sure enough, this bull comes walking through on my side. And Zach spotted him first, then I was on him, and he was just moving through this timber about 70, 80 yards from me. And Zach was kind of letting out some cow calls and trying to get him interested in coming our direction. A few times Zach was able to get on the cow call, and this guy would be interested. He would turn our way. He would even come in a little ways, stop and look right at our blind, looking for the cow that was not there, and would turn around and kind of meander back. He wasn't like overly spooked or anything, but just kept 2 or 3 different times would like turn back around and look our direction. And then upon not seeing a cow would just continue on with what he was doing. So he came in, the closest he got was 60 yards. And at the time, the bow I was shooting was very, my absolute entry-level beginner bow that I bought on clearance. It was a great bow. It did the job, but the last pin on that thing was 50 yards. So I was maxed out and he didn't come in close enough. And so we watched him eventually just get sick of our cow calls and wander back into the timber and bed down 90 yards away from us. So awesome. My bull, my side, giant wind right in my face. This is great. The only problem is there was a 30-yard clearing between the blind and the timber where he was bedded down in. So for me to close that gap, I had no reason to believe he was going to get up from his bed and come our direction because he was heading away from us. I figured eventually he's going to get up and just move farther away from us. So it was kind of like now or never on this bull. Hey guys, this is Eric from Late to the Game Outdoors and producer of Hunting Stories. I wanted to thank Bun and Beanster for making this show possible. These guys are the real deal. Whether you're a seasoned business owner or a startup or running a side hustle like I am, they can help you with your branding, logo, easy to manage websites, and fresh creative ideas for your business. They can also help you look the part by helping you design those tricky one-off events. They deliver amazing printed goods, quality apparel, even signage. Truly a one-stop creative shop. And they stand by their work, guaranteed. For free consultations and useful resources, go to bunandbeanster.com to check them out, or catch them on Instagram at bunandbeanster. Now back to the show. So I strapped the GoPro on my head and left the main camera back in the blind, just kind of rolling in the direction of where I was going, and just kind of decided, okay, I have lots of wind to cover my noise, to cover maybe a little bit of movement, but I just need to crawl hands and knees across this clearing and try to get within 50 yards of this bull. And so as I'm going about this, this feels like my one shot. Like if I blow this, I probably won't get a shot at an elk the rest of the season because we only had a week to hunt. And so as I'm going, I am just moving every stick and pine cone in my path like a landmine, just painstakingly, one step at a time, moving anything that could make noise. And I creep all the way through this clearing and get to the first little, just this little clump of a couple trees. And I kind of pop my head up, and I can see that the elk is still bedded. And there's kind of the patch of trees kind of bends around a little bit, and so I kind of crawl along behind it up to the edge of it, and I look up and he's still right there, and I range him, and he's at 54 yards, which okay, that's the last. I could aim a little high and that'll still work, but he's bedded down, and I don't know why they do this. They always bed behind a giant dead tree with limbs and stuff poking up. I do know why they do that. It's safety, it's protection. It's for this exact reason, so I can't shoot him while he's laying there. But so I have no shot on his vitals, and I see just over, 5 or so yards, kind of diagonally, sort of close to him, or closer in his direction, there's this another little pocket of trees. So I think, okay, I've made it this far. He doesn't seem like he's on alert. He's still laying down. So let me crawl to that patch of trees. Maybe I'll have a different angle that I can get kind of past some of those limbs. And at the very least, it'll close the distance to a solid 50 yards. Should be good. So I creep over to those trees, and just as I arrive at them, I look up, and to my horror, I see that the elk is now standing up, looking right at me. Like he finally caught my movement, finally caught that something fishy is going on. So I rise up to my knees, and he's standing there looking right at me, but he's through all this thick timber. Like there's no lane, and he's staring right at me, so I don't want to just draw my bow. And so as I just sit there, arrow nocked, ready to go, he finally tears off and starts to run from my left to right. And as he's running, the instinct, for some reason, I drew my bow. I don't know why I didn't think, oh, he's blowing out, he's gone. But I just drew my bow as he was running. And sure enough, he ran 10, 15 yards to the side. So he's still about the same distance from me. But he stops and looks again. That thing that they do sometimes where they blow out and they run 15, 20 yards and stop to look back to see what scared them. He did that. He just did it perpendicular to me. So I've already drawn. He stops to look at me again, and he just happens to have his vitals in this 18-inch window between all the trees. And so I, to the best of my recollection, take a deep breath and am careful and going through my whole shot sequence. It's all kind of a blur, as it often is in these situations, but was able to just kind of put the pin right where I wanted it, aimed a little bit high because the last time I had ranged him was 54 and I didn't seem like he had moved any closer, and released the arrow, and he was already on edge, and that bow is a bit on the slow side. So as I've reviewed the footage of this 1,000 times, I believe he jumped the string just a little bit. As soon as the sound of that bow went off, he took this big jump, almost like a white-tailed deer. And for that reason, the arrow hit him a little far back. But as it sailed through the air and as I was watching it, I could have sworn I thought I saw the arrow sail over the back of him. So I immediately had that just heart sinking, oh, I can't believe I missed. But as he's running away, I see that blood is starting to pour out of the side of him, but a little higher and a little further back than I intended. Again, because he kind of jumped that string. But I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay, that was a ton of blood. I actually hit him. This is amazing. And I watch him kind of run around. He makes this big U-turn of sorts and goes heading back into the woods. And I'm sitting there, and I have GoPro on my head footage of my trembling hand trying to find another arrow or trying to knock another arrow. It wasn't working. And it didn't matter because he had run out of sight anyway. but was just so jacked out of my mind. So I took my hat off, marked the tree where I shot, tried to take like a mental image of, okay, he was right there so that we could begin tracking. Head back to the blind where my brother-in-law is and just tell him the story. And it's the usual, sharing hugs and high fives and all that stuff. And then waiting the longest, 20, 30 minutes of my life, just trying to give him time so that if he was taking a little bit to expire, we wouldn't bump him. And so finally the time comes to track the blood, and I get up to where he was standing, and there's all these like wild hoof marks from where he had just, jumped like a kangaroo out of that spot when he heard the bow go off. And then pretty quickly there's a pool of blood and another pool of blood, and we get like 3 or 4 of those. And then the arrow had gone in a little past halfway and finally had come out. I don't know if he ripped it out or if a tree knocked it out, but once it came out, the blood was just insane. Like it was, I don't want to start a debate, but I shoot a mechanical broadhead and it just created this massive wound channel. And as I found him, what actually happened is the broadhead snipped his femoral. So he was just dumping blood. He didn't make it 100 yards before he just piled up dead where he was. So just so much celebration and excitement. And, as the expression goes, now the work begins. We called my father-in-law, who had stayed back at the cabin that day because, again, it was windy, and said, hey, get your pack frame. We've got meat to haul. And so he was coming out to meet us while we were cutting everything up and getting it quartered out. And we were 3 miles from the truck. And it was at this point that I, for the first time ever, decided to unzip the meat compartment in my very budget-friendly Amazon Prime hunting pack I was using, and discovered that that opening goes about 2 inches wide. I don't know what that company thinks people are hauling out of the woods in a meat shelf, but there is no single part of an elk that's going to fit in that. It was a ridiculous and tragic realization at that moment. Lesson to be learned there is to test your gear before you're in the field. But my father-in-law came and he had his pack frame, which I remember helping him rig this up that year. And initially, like, the plan was it was to be used to haul his tree stand into the woods. Like, the tree stand itself had these little nylon straps that you could use, but those were super uncomfortable and like cut off circulation and stuff. So I don't know where what like torture supply store he found this, but it was this plastic frame. And then like he bought these looked like military surplus, like Civil War bandage style belt and shoulder straps that we kind of tied and buckled to these different points on this frame. So it's absolutely this like Frankenstein little pack thing. And so even though my pack isn't going to work to haul large quantities of meat, it's my elk and I'm the dude with the young back, so I should be hauling a bulk of the weight. So my father-in-law decided to switch packs. So I took the back straps and neck meat and a few miscellaneous pieces and shoved them in that microscopic meat compartment on my pack and gave it to my father-in-law. I took a boned-in hind quarter and front quarter and literally ratchet strapped it to that plastic torturous frame and put that on my back to haul it 3 miles back to the truck. And it was hands down the most miserable 3 miles of my life. Like, everything on that pack hurt so bad. The weight was off center. The padding was virtually non-existent. I could hear the plastic frame like bending and like cracking in places. It was not designed for this kind of a load. And so just barely made it out of those woods, got back to the truck. And then it's all celebration from there. You've got antlers at camp, you're cutting up meat, you're eating steaks. You're actually, fun fact, we took the Rocky Mountain oysters, which are testicles, along with all the meat. And my brother-in-law was kind of a foodie type guy, just whipped up this recipe that I think he made up on the spot, where he breaded them and fried them in like bacon grease, and then made this sriracha aioli sauce. I think that's how you say it. It was just hands down one of the most delicious fried snacks I've ever had in my life. And from here on out, whenever I kill a bull or even a deer or something with large enough cojones, I'm going to be taking those and using that recipe because it was amazing. So, any lessons to be pulled from that hunt are to not be afraid to adapt your strategy. as we were just trying to stay on foot and stay mobile and call. We weren't having a lot of luck, so we decided to build a blind and go that way, and it happened to pan out. Also, I said it before, but test your gear. If you haven't opened a meat compartment until you have meat on the ground, you may find yourself sorely disappointed. And mine I also recommend now, several years later, the XO Mountain Gear Pack. I am not endorsed by them, I'm not affiliated with them, but I have been using their pack now for over a year, and it is hands down the greatest pack I've ever worn. So I'll put a link to their website in the description, but if you haven't heard of them or haven't checked it out, yes, it has a steep price tag, but it is worth every single penny, I can promise you. So this story is already close to going over the time that I promised I would keep to, so I'm going to cut it off here, and we will be back next time with another great hunting story. And as always, please subscribe, leave a review would be so helpful to me, and anything you want to hear more about or a guest idea you have, hit me up, and we'll get that set up. Thanks so much for tuning in to Hunting Stories. And if you want to stay up on what we're doing with the podcast or anything else going on with Late to the Game, go ahead and check us out at latetothegameoutdoors.com or give us a follow on Instagram at latetothegameoutdoors. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.